Surely, by now you've heard, men are evil. All of them, always. And if they're white men, they're racist and evil. So there's this article, I'm joking by the way, there's this article by the Guardian, Opinion. Why is the far right dominated by men? Oof, good question. The far right is very male. YouTube is very male. Anti-social justice, very male. Something is happening to young men and they are sick, evil, and far right. I found this particularly interesting because, well, I've talked about the various sides of the culture war. I've heard people say that it's nationalists versus globalists, which I don't agree with because I actually lean more towards internationalism, not necessarily globalism, but internationalism than nationalism, and I'm certainly not an SJW. And there are many progressives who are totally for free trade, international, yada yada. I don't think it's a good descriptor. You have left versus right. What does that even mean? Because I fall on the left end of the spectrum economically, and I'm still not in line with a lot of this identitarian left nonsense. So what is it? Well, one thing I've thought is that, look, it's a little bit of all of these things, but it's kind of, it's tribal. It's people's tribes and where they get their information from. And then where they get their information from results in more sources pushing this information. But I do think it is very much male versus female, seriously. And I think, this is obviously not a left, a tribal left position because economics have nothing to do with it, but the idea that men and women are almost entirely the same and society dictates is like a left-wing belief. There's almost like sexual realism that needs to come into emergence because there are people on the left who don't think there are differences between men and women outside of like secondary sex characteristics. Well, there are. I mean, the obvious one is that guys are chock full of testosterone, and so they get into fights. Like, we know what testosterone does to the body. We know what estrogen does to the body. Trans people take these things to see these effects, and they talk about these changes. We know that people will inject themselves with testosterone to benefit themselves in sporting events and things as such, and you're not allowed to do it. So why are men behaving in a certain way different from women? Why are men on the far right? But before I start reading this article, I want to point out something very interesting. This is an op-ed about, toxic masculinity and all that stuff. But what if I were to tell you that there was also a toxic femininity? Because I also have this from Vox. This is from March. A new study finds more women now lean Democratic. Let me see if I can pull up the stats here. Because they got this bar here, but I don't know if that's the one I want to actually look for. Okay, I guess that's all they have. There was a different stat graph, whatever, from Pew Internet Research, which was easier to read. Share of women who identify with or lean towards Democratic Party has risen since 2015. So I believe the number is about 68%. There was a poll done by Pew and it found that 68% of women were leaning towards the Democratic Party. Men were actually relatively evenly split between Republican and Democrat. But this op-ed, which let's dive right into, this is from last week. It says, "What if male identity rather than racist ideology is the most important reason why people join far-right groups? That is the central claim made by Michael Kimmel, a U.S. sociologist, in his new book, Healing from Hate: How Young Men Get Into and Out of Violent Extremism, which studies why young men join and leave extremist right groups in Germany, Sweden, and the U.S. I just want to also point out that Michael Kimmel has been accused of being an abuser, a sexual harasser, of being transphobic. All of these things, it says racist ideology. Well, at least according to intersectional, feminism, I would say the criticisms about Michael Kimmel are that he is exactly what he preaches against. So he's one of these bad men, okay? Because men bad, okay? And don't forget to clean your room, bucko, if you want to be one of the good men. But apparently, no, Jordan Peterson's one of the bad guys too, at least according to these people. So they say, while the central thesis is slightly overstated, the book is remarkably well written and researched. Kimmel, a longtime scholar of men and masculinity, fills the book with quotes from his many interviews with so-called formers. Almost everyone will have noticed that far-right groups and rallies are predominantly male, from the original deadly Unite the Right rally last year to the pathetic Unite the Right 2 last weekend, but Kimmel is one of the few to have made the focus on his research. Let me pull something up for you. From the Washington Examiner, March for Our Lives participants mostly middle-aged, educated women. Something is happening in our politics that's just dividing men and women. You know what really bums me out? I do think there absolutely is something to biological sex when it pertains to politics, and to be overtly sexual realist, the stereotype is that women are more empathetic and men are more systematic, and we saw that with the James Damore scenario about him saying women want to socialize and work in communal settings, and men want to systemize and things to that effect. And I think that to an extent that's true. I'm not a scientist, so I deferred to computational biologists like James Damore, who, yes, he's a scientist. A lot of people never talked about that. But why is it that March for Our Lives, mostly women, unite the right, mostly men? I found that, well, look, we can say this. Obviously, feminism, which focuses on gaining rights for women, they say it's for equality, but they're strictly about gaining rights for women. I think that's where I'll talk about it in a second, but obviously, if you're going to advocate for feminism, you're going to have mostly women and like male allies. And then you get this weird phenomenon where male allies, like to a weird degree, end up being sexual abusers. But I want to point out, right? Yes, there was a lot of men at these certain right-wing rallies, but there's a lot of women at the left-wing rallies. So is it really male versus female? So let's see what they argue here. From interviews with former activists, Kimmel summarizes that far-right groups use masculinity in three distinct but related ways. First, they use it to describe or explain their personal situation. For instance, you are single or unemployed because others took your girl job. That's not unique to to men, okay? That's a common talking point across the board. People, look, you are single or unemployed because others took your girl job, right? Literally, the left argues about the wealthy elite stealing from the poor. That's why they advocate for socialism. It's always about an enemy taking from you. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman or left or right. Second, masculinity is used to problematize the other. They are not real men because they are either too effeminate or too animalistic. This is ridiculous. Third, and finally, they use it to recruit members. You can regain your masculinity and thus your girl in your job by fighting the others. Right, literally what the left does too. This is not unique to the right. It's not unique to men. It exists. It is a tactic. Point out the enemy, create a villain, and fight against them. That's what they do. You create a cause, and you need enemies, and you're not really going to make it bears. Who's going to be the enemy of the apex predator human? Are you going to be like, everyone, please, the bears are a problem? Sure, maybe in an area with bears. But for the most part, when you need an enemy and you need to defend people from the enemy so you can rally support and gain power, you need to point the finger at another human. And what they say, it's funny. They use masculinity to problematize the other. Okay, well, feminists literally use femininity to problematize masculinity, which is the other. Like, they're doing the same thing. And not only that, left-wing and right-wing identitarians use race to do that too. It's like, it's total BS. This is like, what's funny about this, they don't understand they're literally doing the same thing. Right, this statement right here is pure irony. It is there should be a screen grab of this in the dictionary next to irony. Masculinity is used to problematize the other. You are literally using masculinity to problematize them because they are the other. It's absolutely ridiculous. You know what I want to say? I think there is a such thing as toxic masculinity. I really do. I think good masculinity is calm, collected, respect, courage, wisdom, stoicism, pragmatism, etc. Toxic masculinity is like this. I don't know if Cass Mudd sounds like a woman, but I wouldn't say these things are toxic masculinity. I would say this is just psychological politicization, weaponizing, creating the other. It can affect anybody. Toxic masculinity to me is more like isolated, socially inept people who have certain masculine behaviors taken to the extreme or in the wrong direction. There was something I watched from PragerU, something to the effect of like good masculinity versus bad masculinity. I think there is toxic femininity. I think there is toxic masculinity. And I think there is there's femininity and masculinity. And I don't exactly know how you define these because it's pretty nebulous. But to me, masculinity is selflessness, it's sacrifice. And this is not unique necessarily to men. It's not like women can't have these same things too. But the idea is typically like, the guy puts his jacket down for the woman to protect her, women and children first, these kinds of ideas, which that's got a bit of a myth behind it, but to an extent it existed for a little bit. This idea that men are going to work hard to save others and provide and care. This idea of masculinity being like going on the hunt, going out and risking yourself. And femininity is more about the community, being nurturing and sympathetic and helping people, like being more therapeutic. I feel like if you look at the traditional roles, a masculine role in your life is someone who's going to be like, here's how to do X task and teach you to survive. And the feminine role is going to be like, let me create an emotional bond with you so that you can, I don't know, connect better with other people. I'm thinking about it like a mom or a dad. And so then toxic is like the drunk dad who is cold and an asshole. And the toxic mother is the fake crocodile tears, I demand more from you. Like there's negative behaviors associated with femininity and masculinity. This is just absolute BS, right? They're trying to now equate far-right and neo-Nazi groups with men. Like this is the encroaching, I don't know what the culture war is about. It's just insane. But look, it's fair to point out, yes, at these rallies, it's mostly guys. And at the like March for Our Lives and things, it's mostly women. But I want to make a couple points. Toxic masculinity also affects Antifa, right? And they could point this out, that far left rallies have the same fucking problem. Antifa is mostly white dudes. So when they go around bashing skulls and throwing bricks and knocking things over, it's mostly white men, okay? So you know what I really love about this like white man hate that appears in left-wing identitarianism is that like they don't recognize they're talking literally about themselves too. Like there's that famous video, I don't know if you've seen it, where the guy goes, "You're a white male," and I'm like, you're literally a white male. Like, what are you talking about? How does a white male criticize someone else for being a white male when you're literally a white male? This is why I think identitarianism just ultimately doesn't work. At least, and I just don't, let me just end by this, because this is just so ridiculous. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. It doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right. The fact is, someone is going to point in another direction and try and convince you that person is your enemy. And you might disagree, but you know what I love about the culture war? Normally, I shouldn't say normally, but 10 years ago, Ben Shapiro would be someone I would protest, right? I am not pro-life, I disagree with so much of what he says, and he was the polar extreme to me, right? Ben's just like a conservative nowadays, right? So if he was speaking, I'd probably be out there be like, I disagree with what he's saying, in pamphlet and whatever. Today, because the culture war is so absolutely bonkers insane, Ben Shapiro is actually someone I would sit down and go, that's interesting. I disagree. Interesting, Ben. Interesting. Because so long as someone like Ben Shapiro and people like Steven Crowder advocate nonviolence and the need for dialogue and dialectic, I agree. And I know that we disagree on a ton of issues. But we'll sit down and smile and laugh and share a beer while we criticize the crazy people, be it the white identitarian, like alt-right, I'm talking about Unite the Right type folks who come out with tiki torches, or the left identitarians. I got a couple more stories coming up, so stick around. It'll be up in just a few minutes.